Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Hello, everybody. It's Carter Froelich, and welcome to the Land to Lots podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming to the show Chris Voss. And for those of you that don't know Chris is probably the world's expert in the art of negotiation. So to some degree, Chris, I feel like I'm talking with Sun Tzu here today. The art of war, but the art of negotiation.
Son of Sue? I thought it was a boy named Sue.
Yeah, boy named Sue. And for those of our listeners that may not know Chris, so first of all, Chris is the founder and CEO of the Black Swan Group. Prior to this, he was a FBI hostage negotiator for 24 years. And during this time, he handled over 150 international hostage negotiations. And in 2016, Chris co-authored the book that you see on the screen below you, or in front of you, Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It, which I think, Chris, really revolutionized the negotiation practice. So thank you so much for taking your time today to speak with our listeners.
Oh, Carter, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
And you're from Iowa. I'm from North Dakota. I feel, we're kind of sort of the same age. You're a little, I think you graduated before me, if I can say that.
I'm probably older, and quite likely.
So I feel I have this kinship with you already.
Thank you.
How does a kid from Iowa go to be the top FBI hostage negotiator?
You drive up to Interstate 80 and you make a right.
Yeah.
That was a long journey. I mean, the cliche, following your bliss.
Yeah.
I was just following one thing after another that intrigued me and interested me. I'm very coachable.
Uh-huh.
If nothing else, I'm coachable. And I work really hard.
Yeah.
Originally wanted to be in SWAT for a variety of reasons, and I was, and made the transition to hostage negotiation and found hostage negotiation was more satisfying to me than SWAT ever was. And I love SWAT.
Yeah.
But then I got into hostage negotiation and just making a difference with your words, changing outcomes with your words. That became an addiction, and I was so dedicated to it that I was in charge of all of our international kidnapping response operations, where negotiation was a strategy to get a release and also bring the bad guys to justice.
And you said something that just really resonated me. And here again, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. I've read your book. You said something, changing outcomes with your words, which I just find that fascinating. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, it really was kind of crazy because, especially if you're in SWAT or law enforcement, you're used to really relying upon your actions versus your words. But a police officer, the tool that he uses more often than anything else is his voice.
Yeah.
And I had seen some great emotional intelligence when I was a police officer. With some detectives that were particularly good, and show me stuff that I could imagine, how a soft tone of voice and different phrasing and change in inflection.
Yeah.
When I was used to being pushy and assertive, leverage, if you will.
Yeah.
And then when I started getting taught in hostage negotiation, before that I volunteered on a suicide hotline. And when they were briefing me up for the training, I assumed a call on a suicide hotline might last for hours.
Yeah.
And they said, every call that you do, you'll be done in 20 minutes or less. And I was like, no, what? Seriously? And it was the magic of empathy, actual emotional intelligence, applied emotional intelligence, not sympathy.
Yeah.
How that would change things. And so for a hostage negotiator to walk into a siege that's stuck.
Yeah.
And to have an outcome, it's stuck for hours. You walk in, 20 minutes later, it's over. I mean, that's pretty cool. It's just based on the words. It's like magic.
So did you have a background in psychology, sociology, human relations? How did you learn emotional intelligence? Was it just because you were coachable and you worked really hard and you listened and you observed, or did you have formal training?
No training, no background, no
That's awesome.
experience, nothing.
Yeah,
I was taught how to listen and then how to actually integrate what you've heard into what you said.
yeah,
And just utterly, I mean, the reason I volunteered on the suicide hotline was because I wanted to be on the hostage negotiation team, and I was rejected. I went
uh-huh,
to the woman who was in charge in New York and said, "Hey, want to be on the team?" She said, what's your background? You got a degree? No. You got experience? No. You got education? No. You have any background in this at all? And
yeah.
I'm like, no. And she said, okay, well, you can't. You're unqualified.
Oh,
But because I'm coachable,
yep,
there's a phrase, never take direction from somebody who hasn't been where you're going.
yeah, exactly.
She's the head of the negotiation team. So it was somebody I should listen to about hostage negotiation. I wouldn't ask her
Yeah,
what kind of car to buy or,
yeah,
what restaurant to go to, but negotiation, she's running the team. If I'm horrible, she pays the price.
yeah.
So what can I do to be a great asset to you? How can I learn this? She said, go volunteer on a suicide hotline. And that's where I learned it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm going to take you back to Iowa just for a minute. What was the first negotiation that you can remember as a kid? Where you
You
were
know,
conscious that you were negotiating?
I don't think I was,
Or
now every conversation is a negotiation.
yeah,
Anytime the words I want or I need are in your
yeah,
head or in your mouth, I need directions. I need a cup of coffee. I want to know how I can come onto the negotiation team. That's a negotiation.
yeah.
I don't remember that
Okay.
growing up. I'm
Yeah.
my father, blue collar guy.
Hmm.
He'd give me a list of tasks to accomplish every day. He was an entrepreneur. He believed that you
Yeah.
should work hard and figure things out.
Yep.
And I was taught how to work hard. He
Yeah.
he was high integrity guy, high hard work.
Yep.
Was not a particularly expressive guy.
Hmm.
Eloquence, persuasion. His view of persuasion was like, here's a crowbar, go to work.
Yeah. That sounds vaguely familiar. I was, working for my dad, when I was 12 years old and I never quit,
There you
I mean,
go.
kind
So,
of thing.
yeah, North Dakota, right? You
Yeah,
you
darn
got
right. Yeah.
yeah,
Working in
and,
the
and
lumberyard.
you
Yeah.
guys are shoveling snow in June.
Lots of it. So if is there one hostage negotiation that particularly sticks out to you where you thought, oh God, this may not end out or end up very well? And then what changed and how did it change? And what did you learn from that?
Well, first of all, hostage negotiators are not successful 100% of the time.
Hmm.
We got roughly a 93% success rate,
Hmm.
which means 7% of the time it's gonna go bad.
Yeah.
There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
And I negotiated enough cases. I had cases go bad.
Yeah.
But then how does it go bad? Does it go bad in a way that the bad guys want to do it again?
Yeah.
If they get a ransom, is a ransom so high they want to do it again?
Hmm.
So the first real big negotiation I was involved in the Philippines, the Jeffrey Schilling case, terrorist group on the other side. We were stuck in the mud for quite a while.
Yeah.
Um, we tried some facts, logic, and reason with the other guy. Claimed Islamic uh, freedom fighter in
Hmm.
his would have been his vernacular.
Oh, okay.
But what do they say? All politics are local. A
Yeah.
Muslim in the south of the Philippines is not the same as a Muslim in Egypt
Yeah.
or anywhere in the Middle East. So that one, there was a point in time we were fairly sure they were going to kill. They made a threat where it looked really personal,
Yeah.
and we thought that they were going to relieve Mr. Schilling of his head. But we
Yeah.
had worked empathy so hard on these guys that ultimately on the particular day they thought they were going to execute him, we knew they were vulnerable to his mother's influence. We flew his mother to the Philippines.
Wow. Yeah.
But we had been holding that card based on application of emotional intelligence throughout and bonding,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, them bonding with us throughout. So that when the moment came that we needed to exercise a very limited emotional intelligence play, we couldn't have done it the whole time.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, Schilling walked away. He wasn't ransomed out. He wasn't rescued. He wasn't harmed. He wasn't released. They dropped their guard enough that they had the opportunity to walk away, and that was a great case.
Yeah. And I'm going to get back to this empathy, but when you were talking with the hostage holders in the Philippines, were you the sole communicator with them, or were there others, or are they just dealing with Chris Voss, period, all the time? I mean,
All right,
during
so
the communication.
the nuance to international cases is I was always the coach.
Okay. Okay.
And if anything, our marketing says Chris Voss, greatest negotiator. I'm probably the greatest negotiation coach, which doesn't make me the greatest negotiator.
Yeah. Yeah.
Phil Jackson was probably the greatest coach in the history of the NBA. He was not the greatest player. He didn't even start for the team that he was on. He was a six man. It was a championship team,
Yeah.
which meant that Phil was very good.
And by the way, from North Dakota.
Yeah, of course, right? Yeah, that's true.
I just had to throw that in. I'm plugging my old state. Sorry, but go ahead, Chris. I interrupted.
Or Steve Kerr, coach of the Golden State Warriors.
Yep.
Again, Steve was consistently the sixth man. He was never a sixth man of the Bulls and the Spurs. Not the best player in the NBA or even that team that he was on. So I'm a negotiation coach. So I'm coaching people internationally. I got to find somebody who's coachable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're coachable, then I will coach you how to exercise emotional intelligence within the context of what we're doing in order to get the upper hand. I know I veered off some from your question.
Yeah, no. Well, and I'm gonna. So when I was reading your book, some of the things that I took away, and this is never split the difference, are three concepts that resonated with me. One was tactical empathy,
Right.
I believe. The other was mirroring, and then the third was no is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Could and you've been talking about empathy, and I think that's really huge, but could you explain to our listeners what each of those three are in layman's terms to help us understand better what you're meaning?
Sure. So counter to the colloquial usage of the word empathy, empathy is not agreement. Typically, somebody says, "Oh, I have empathy for them." That means you either agree or you sympathize.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not sympathy. It's not even compassion. Now, empathy is a precursor to compassion.
Yeah.
Empathy is the transmission of information. You are articulating how you believe the other side sees things.
Yeah.
I can say when I was working terrorism in New York, and we were trying to get people who were legitimate Muslims to testify in a civilian trial against an Islamic cleric who had committed crimes.
Mm-hmm.
He was, in fact, a legitimate Islamic cleric, just like any minister in any church in the United States would be a legitimate minister. That doesn't mean that they're not capable of committing crime. And
Right.
many Christian ministers are embezzlers.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're human. So this guy was a legitimate cleric who committed crimes. I'm talking to Muslims, see if I can get him to testify voluntarily. And I would say, you believe that for the last 200 years, there have been a succession of American governments that have been anti-Islam.
Yeah.
And they would be like, yeah. So that's empathy. I said, you believe this is the case. And then I shut up. I didn't agree. I didn't disagree. I didn't explain. I didn't go on to say, Bob, we have a First Amendment guaranteed freedom. Right. You state the other person's perspective accurately, and then you shut up.
And as a result of that, they feel understood or heard? Is
The
that?
feeling of being understood triggers the following neurochemicals in you:
Uh-huh.
oxytocin and serotonin. What does it do to you
Hmm.
to get a thunderbolt of
Yeah.
these chemicals? Oxytocin makes you bond with me.
Uh-huh.
First time you saw your child, your newborn child, you got hit with a thunderbolt. Oxytocin, you
Yeah.
bonded with that kid.
Yeah.
Kid didn't bond with you. You know, a kid, if it's a newborn, is looking around going like, where the hell am I at? 20 minutes ago, I was someplace warm and comfortable, and now I'm cold. People are smacking me on the ass. They ain't bonding with you. You're bonded with them. Oxytocin is this one-way bond.
Yeah.
Now, the other interesting thing about oxytocin, uh, and my source on this is Andrew Huberman Labs podcast, great
Hmm.
source of
Yep.
neuroscience, like one of the more reliable sources on earth of neuroscience.
Is he from Stanford? Is that?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
Stanford professor.
Yep. Got it.
One of his podcasts on relationships, he's talking about oxytocin, and he says oxytocin makes you tell the truth.
Mm.
Hence, so much honest pillow talk.
Yeah.
But all right, so if you feel heard and you get oxytocin, then you bond with me and you tell me the truth. Now, the kicker to that is serotonin, which is the drug of satisfaction, a neurochemical of satisfaction, which means you want less.
Yeah.
So if I can make you feel heard in a negotiation, you
Oh,
bond with me, you're more honest with me, you're less demanding. There is no better setup
yeah.
to then collaborate in a
Wow.
negotiation. That's why I want to make you feel heard,
Yeah.
because you're going to open up to me in ways unlike any other. And since I didn't talk you into it, but you got hits of your own neurochemistry,
Yeah.
it's more durable. That bond that you feel towards me is going to last beyond the conversation.
That's interesting. And so many negotiations we have, and we work exclusively with the private sector, but a lot of times we're coming in to talk to a jurisdiction and they're like this at their chair. Yeah, I mean they're feeling defensive already before you even sit down, just with their body language. And I
Yeah,
can see
yeah.
how this tactical empathy would really start to get them to, wow, that's
Yeah, it's
amazing.
just it's really impossible to resist
Yeah.
because I'm triggering your neurochemicals,
Yeah.
and you really don't know what's going on. All you know is that suddenly I'm a different human being than I was when I walked in the door.
Yeah. So then how does that layer in with the mirroring and I think also labeling? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well,
The two.
mirroring is this great technique that is stupidly simple and stupidly effective. Mirroring starts with repeating the last 1 to 3 words of what somebody's just said. Just repeating. And it doesn't have to be the last 1 to 3 words. It could be 5, it could be
Yeah.
1, really not more than 5. It is a superior move to what did you mean by that? Or tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Because most of the time, if you say to somebody, what did you mean by that? They say it again with the same words, only louder. Like,
Yeah.
where is the Eiffel Tower? Where is the Eiffel Tower? When I'm trying to find the Eiffel Tower in Paris, like I say it louder, suddenly it's more comprehensible because I was
Yeah.
louder. But mirroring doesn't do that. For whatever reason, mirroring triggers in you the feeling of being heard and wanting to expand and go on.
Yeah.
And so it's a great way to gently guide a conversation or to draw somebody out or to get them without friction.
Yeah.
Because the problem with what did you mean by that? The what question triggers deep thinking, which can be tiring.
Yeah.
And you're going to think about your answer before you give it. If I say to you, what's the biggest challenge you face? Or what stands in our way?
Yeah.
You're going to stop and you're going to think and you're going to try to figure it out. And then you're going to decide whether or not you want to tell me.
Yeah.
If I would have mirrored, what you just said, or I labeled it, then you don't stop and think, you just start talking.
Yeah. So you could say, "Oh, that's a really that's interesting. Tell me more." Or would that be a way of doing it, or
It's a better way of saying
better way. Yeah. Yeah.
Because they feel that you're interested.
Yeah.
the point of saying that's interesting is to let them know that you're interested.
Yeah. Yeah.
You short circuit that, you hack it. The quicker mechanism is just to mirror it. And then you feel that I'm very interested.
Yeah.
And
Okay, got it.
you're quite encouraged to go on.
Okay. Interesting. That's neat. Yeah, I'm seeing how all these things just kind of come together. And then what about no? Isn't because I just say, in my world, no is just okay, not today, but maybe tomorrow. But I think you have a different meaning to that, isn't
Well,
as
even
an
since
opportunity.
even since the book came out, it's an opportunity, beginning of a conversation. The reality is there's both a Pavlovian response to yes and no. What's the Pavlovian response? The psychology experiment from, I don't know, the 1930s, a Russian. Every time they feed this dog, they ring a bell. So pretty soon, every time they ring the bell, the dog salivates in anticipation of food. Pavlovian response to yes and no. If I try to get you to say yes, I'm taking you someplace. It's a hook. You want to make more money. Would you like to stay in 5-star hotels for free? This is how timeshares are sold.
Yeah. Yeah.
And timeshares are bankrupting people right and left.
Yeah.
Or cars are sold and you bought a car that you didn't want. Or
Yeah.
coupon books are sold. You can't figure out how to use the coupons.
Yeah.
Yes has triggered us that if I say yes, I'm probably digging myself into a hole that I'm going to have trouble getting out.
Yeah.
The yes momentum is they get 3 yeses in a row, ask for the money. Each yes is a micro agreement or a tie down. Hence the feeling of digging into a hole based on yes. So you learn that if you say no, you protected yourself from the tie down, from the hole, the commitment. So the Pavlovian response to no is you feel safe. It's an emotional trigger. So what do I do instead? I don't say, do you agree? I say, do you disagree? I don't say, is this a good idea? I say, is this a ridiculous idea?
Yeah.
I don't say, have you got a few minutes to talk? I say, is now a bad time to talk?
Yeah.
We got a whole succession of the most common yes questions. We've worded them out for you, scripted them out so that they're no questions.
Yeah.
And it makes an instantaneous acceleration in everybody's life.
I can see why that would be so powerful. It's just how you're transforming that question. And to your point, not tying anybody down or having them dig a hole mentally for themselves.
Right.
Yeah, that's huge. Are there any concepts, and we're going to get into the real estate world here in just a minute, Chris, but those were just 3 of the concepts that I pulled out of the book that were meaningful to me. There's a lot of them in there. Are there other concepts that you feel are equally important as it would relate to the conversation we're going to start to get into in terms of negotiations in the real estate world?
Well, the bread and butter are labels and mirrors and no-answered questions. And then depending upon the situation, you start bundling the skills for strategies. And one of the biggest things really to remember is the human brain is wired to be negative. Ballpark 75%.
Wow.
So, there's an old phrase in sales that 70% of buy decisions are made to avoid a loss, not accomplish a gain.
Yep.
Or you're making a proposal and the other guy's more worried about getting fired. You start understanding negativity and how it dominates our survival instincts, it's everywhere. So we approach negativity by deactivating it via the use of labels as opposed to trying to overcome with positives or denying it. And if you're in any given negotiation at some point in time, the other side's going to perceive you to be a threat or perceive you to be greedy. And so as your gut instinct hones itself, you learn to say, I don't want you to think, instead of saying, I don't want to seem greedy, we teach you to say, this is probably going to seem greedy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, those have 2 vastly different impacts on the human brain. And the second one is a way to deactivate it or inoculate from a negative. It doesn't plan in it. You can't plan emotions.
Is that because you're saying what they're already thinking?
It
This
has a
is
lot. It has a
yeah.
lot to do with it.
Okay.
And then there's been actual neuroscience experiments that have shown that the best way to deactivate a negative motion is to simply call it out, observe it,
Yeah.
label it, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, I'm going to label another thing. Now, your company is called the Black Swan Group,
Mhm.
and Black Swan has a meeting. What is a black swan for the audience?
The little thing that changed everything.
More?
Nassim Nicholas Taleb wrote a book in 2007. By the way, he's got a number of books out there. I recommend them all. Antifragile, The Black Swan, among the tops. He is a heck of a writer, very deep thinker.
Yeah.
But his 2007 book, The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. What are the little things that change everything? And in point of fact, every negotiation has got something little in it that could change everything if you could just get at it and the
Yeah.
other side would just trust you, or if it was innocuous and you just got them to say it inadvertently. And that's really why we call our
Yeah.
company the Black Swan Group, because the black swans are always there, and if you could just pull them out, it would change everything.
Yeah. And so oftentimes, and now I'm going to get into the real estate. We're dealing with land buyers, land sellers. Oftentimes, in a land acquisition, sellers have an emotional attachment to the land. It may have been in their family for generations, or they're fixated with a financial return that they believe they should be getting. But is there a way that when someone can see if there's any black swans under the surface that they may be able to tap into to to help move the negotiation forward?
Yeah, well, typically, one of the ways it works on a regular basis is we have a label. The label is the magic wand,
Hmm.
and it's simply, it seems like you have a reason for saying that,
Yeah,
or it seems like something just crossed your mind.
yeah,
Um, so anybody says anything, you gotta know why they're saying it is more important than what they said.
yeah,
You can't ask why they said that, because that triggers immediate defensiveness, puts them on the guard. Somebody says, why did you say that? When you think somebody's wrong, you always say, why did you say that? People are conditioned that they're being accused of a mistake with
yeah,
the word why.
yeah,
But he instead say, seems like you have a reason for saying that. Seems like you have a reason for what you want. Or if they didn't ask anything, let's say you saw their eyes go up when you said something, or you saw a change,
yeah.
what we refer to as an affect change, or they're frowning.
Hmm.
Like the data says that if somebody's frowning at you, they could be angry, they could have gas.
Which one is a higher probability?
But they're actually equal.
Yeah. Oh,
So if they get a look on their face like they're unhappy,
yeah,
and you read them for being angry when in fact their stomach is upset,
yeah,
you just went down the wrong path. So instead you say, it seems like something just crossed your mind.
yeah,
And then it'll be like, well, I was thinking about the implementation of your idea. Or they're going to say, yeah, actually, I'm not comfortable with what you just said. Or they could say,
yeah.
well, actually, my lunch is coming back up on me. Any one of those are vastly different.
Yeah,
And if you think you're an expert on body language and you pick one, because the experts always pick one,
yeah,
I'm so smart, I know what it is, then two-thirds of the time you're going to be wrong.
yeah.
And the success rate should not be that low.
Well, and
So,
it kind of ties it back to empathy. I mean, you're noticing them, you're listening to them, you're hearing them, you're asking a question, what's going on? I mean, saying it more eloquently than that, but there's that connection and forward progress with the empathy.
yes,
That's
exactly.
huge.
Yeah, very well said. It's the next level up.
Yeah. Wow. I got to enroll in some of your classes. I mean, this is fascinating stuff.
And it is. I mean, I got
Yeah,
to tell you something. The people that once they start tapping into this language and
yeah,
they start taking our classes, they join our community. We're coaching them like with the same amount of enthusiasm that you're feeling now about the possibilities.
yeah,
It is so much fun.
yeah.
It is just so much fun.
Well, and now I'm kind of going off script here a little bit, but there has been such a change. I mean, let's face it, you and I are of a certain generation. We rode our bikes, we talked to everybody, everything was face to face all the time. Have you seen a huge disconnect, or what has been the impact of social media, texting? People don't even call each other anymore. They're emailing. Here's the contract, take it or leave it. What have you seen as it relates to that, or is negotiation still face to face?
No,
In
it's
room or
people are more disconnected. There is a variety of reasons why a lot of people have lost emotional intelligence, but
yeah,
the upside opportunity to that is the people that discover it, they're like, holy cow, nobody told me about this.
yeah,
Like when we first started, and there's always been a bad rap on millennials. Different generations going to criticize
yeah,
each other.
yeah, yeah.
So, and you're really talking about the middle of the bell curve on any given generation.
Yep.
So, but when the millennials started showing up in our negotiation training because they've been excluded from the power of great in-person verbal communication, they like discovered a new toy. Like I had no idea. Like this is awesome.
Yeah,
That our generation, that our teachers and our parents thought we wanted it all to be digital.
yeah.
And so they fed us what they thought we wanted.
Interesting. Yeah,
And we thought we wanted it too. But now that I could talk to somebody,
yeah,
I got a new toy. I got a new tool.
yeah.
Life has just added a new dimension. So that's the far more interesting thing of the millennials and the digital era people being excluded from this.
Yeah,
It's for them, it's a new toy. It adds so much depth and color to their life that
makes
they can't
sense.
get enough of it if they're coachable, if they
Yeah,
want to learn.
yeah. That's interesting. And now so we've learned to talk and we're communicating again, and I'm just kind of picking off of what you just said. In your book, you also talk about the power of silence and how that can be used in negotiations. Could you expand on that a little bit, Chris?
Yes. So silence in a negotiation. There are three types of negotiators. There are assertives, analysts, and accommodators.
Hmm.
It's a caveman response to a threat: fight, flight, make friends.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
have enough data. We've got a test we give people to find out which of your conflict types you are. We've got enough data to support the hypothesis that the world splits pretty evenly into thirds.
Okay.
Different populations will lean in small segments one direction or another, but doctors, a third, a third, a third. Lawyers, a third, a third, a third. Mailmen, a third, a third, a third. Chinese, a third, a third, a third, by
Yeah.
and large. Why am I going on about that? Silence means something different to each type.
Mm.
The accommodators, the make friends, the basically very hopeful, cheery relationship, principally relationship default mode. They don't believe time is money. They believe relationships are money.
Yeah.
Silence to them, giving someone as a silent treatment is the most brutal thing they could do. So
Yeah.
silence to them is horrifying.
Yeah.
They think if they go silent, when they're signaling anger, they go silent.
Hmm.
So consequently, they figure every time they go silent, the other side interprets as anger because of their own projection bias. Now, analysts, um, example of an analyst is Elon Musk.
Hmm.
Example of an Lex Friedman, a podcaster that I love being on his show.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the more visible examples of an analyst is Musk.
Hmm.
Silence is a time to think and actually to feel connection
Hmm.
and bonding.
Hmm.
Lex Friedman is interviewing Elon Musk. and he asks Elon a question. And Elon sits in silence for 22 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, most people cannot stay in silence for 3 seconds. Most people, once you've got more than a second of silence, they start talking. Imagine if you interpreted Elon's silence as anger, when in fact it was contemplation.
Yeah.
Lex sits there with his mouth shut and waits for Elon to come up with an answer. So silence to a third of the planet is a time for contemplation and bonding.
Yeah.
Lex talks about how he loves to share silence with people because he feels it draws them closer together. 180-degree reaction from the accommodator, Richard
Yeah.
Branson, is an accommodator. Richard Branson,
Yeah.
you can't find a picture of him where he's not smiling. Now, the third type, Jeff Bezos, the assertive.
Mm-hmm.
Silence is an opportunity to talk. You've gone silent because you want to hear more from me. So I'm going to speak up when you're silent.
Yeah.
Because you can't wait. You can't wait for me to hear what I have to say. And that may be an exaggeration on Jeff Bezos, but he strikes me as an assertive guy, and in his evolution as a human being, I'm sure he listens a lot now. So I don't mean it to sound like that you sit down with Bezos and he does nothing but talk. He probably listens like crazy because he's so evolved. But he's an example of an assertive. Donald Trump's an assertive.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody reacts so intensely to Donald Trump, either positively or negatively. There are less emotional reactions to Bezos, which is why I use him as an example.
Yeah.
But those are the three types on silence. You asked me a question about what does silence mean? Like I'm gonna shut up because it helps me assess who you are. And if you are an analyst, I will shut up and listen,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to draw closer to me every time I do.
So that's really interesting, and I think for the most part, our listeners, and I may be oversimplifying, don't have a lot of training in negotiation. If they do, it's just because they've been doing it for so long and they're learning it, but they're not really putting strategies, maybe they are, or names with things. But if you're in a negotiation and you're across the table from somebody and you're not recognizing that they're one of those categories, assertive, analyst, or an accommodator, how does that put you at a disadvantage?
So, are you at a disadvantage if you don't know which type you're sitting across the table from, assertive,
Mhm.
analyst, or accommodator?
Yep.
Which is really one of the beautiful things about labels and mirrors, because while we were running this uh, three types questionnaire to determine your type, we've done it with literally tens of thousands of people. And the first time I came across this was in 2004, which
Mhm.
now is 20 years.
Wow.
We've also asked, then after we type you in one of our classes, one of our training sessions, we'll say, all right, so of the skills, what skill would you like to have used with you to make a great deal with you?
Mhm.
And all three types put labels and mirrors in their top three choices. It may not be number one,
Mhm.
but it is number two and number three.
Mm.
So when you get into a negotiation, if you've just exercised the basics, and the basics aren't sexy, but they are how you master. The basics are the tools of mastery. They're always the tools of mastery.
Yeah.
You master labels and mirrors, then you will figure out which type it is, and type becomes a problem at impasse. And because of the different nature of the three types, their reaction to the same set of circumstances will create an impasse. So you need to worry about type not at the beginning
Yeah.
as you're feeling somebody out, but as you're getting into it, as you get to impasse. And then figure that if you've got an impasse in a negotiation, it's most likely due to misunderstanding as to what was said and not a disagreement as to what was said.
Okay. Huh, that's really interesting. Uh, in the world that our listeners are in, oftentimes a land developer may be negotiating with the seller. At the same time, they're trying to entitle the land. We've got they may be trying to close with the builder at the same time or get them interested. Everything they can possibly do to de-risk a transaction. Oftentimes, all of these parties have conflicting goals. So, is there any recommendations in your vast experience, Chris, when we're dealing with multiple parties in different negotiations, on how we can reconcile all of these conflicting goals? And I know that's a really broad question, but it's one I'm curious to find out how you would respond to that type of
Well,
situation.
they don't just have conflicting goals, they have a variety of constraints.
Hmm. True.
Now, a goal is where your profit is, and a constraint is where you go bankrupt.
Hmm.
So, which one are you going to think about first?
Yeah.
And so, instead of exploring where somebody tried to go, then how do you explore what their constraints are? And it's
Yeah.
instead of, what would I have to say to you in order to make this work?
Yeah.
Instead, you say, what's stopping you from making this deal? Now,
Yeah.
people are much more willing to talk about obstacles than they are about other sorts of motivations. And they're much more willing to give you an indicator, because if they got an obstacle, it's what's really clouding their thinking.
Yeah.
And they're more willing to share that because there's no commitment in sharing. Like, I throw an obstacle out here, you probably can't solve it. But even if you did, I never said I would make the deal. Like, there's so many reasons for people to be more free in discussing obstacles than
Right.
any other, their constraints, than any other issue, because it's uppermost on their mind. It's what's obscuring their thinking. So then that becomes the avenue, having developed a conversational, trusted relationship,
Hmm.
because you talked about obstacles
Yep.
and you explored them. Now, the really important issue is, did you explore the obstacle? And here's what I mean by that. You probably would, whichever side of the transaction you're in, if you're in a
Hmm.
professional, the obstacles are going to be fairly predictable and you got answers.
Yep.
Now, what you've done is you've failed. The beginning of this, we talked about the feeling of being heard, the feeling of being understood.
Yeah.
If you say, what's stopping you from doing this? And I give you an answer and you immediately come at me with an answer, I'm not going to see you as prepared. I'm going to see you as having a pre-packaged answer
Yeah.
where you didn't listen to me at all. Now, the really important thing to me is, since I don't feel heard, even if your answer is perfect, there's going to be some misalignment at some point in time. And what you're demonstrating to me is that you don't actually listen to me, which means you're not going to catch the misalignment.
Yeah.
And how much time do you have for somebody who doesn't listen to you? None.
Man.
I am sitting at a conference of people that invest in commercial real estate and make a living investing in commercial real estate, probably a year and a half ago. The entire conference, everybody invests in commercial real estate
Yeah.
on their behalf, or on behalf of investors. So I'm at the VIP lunch. And what does it mean to be at the VIP lunch? The most successful people in the room are at lunch with me. They don't want to talk to me. So guy to my right says, have you ever thought about investing in commercial real estate? I'm like, not really. He goes, well, what are some of the reasons for why not? And I gave him an answer. And immediately he had an
Yeah.
answer
Yeah.
for the problem that I posed. Immediate. Which, of course, he knows his way around. There's some predictable answers.
Yeah.
Your job is to have an answer. So I'm like, that was a little fast. I'm not sure that you're going to catch a nuance when it comes by you.
Yeah.
So I give him he asked me another question, what I answer, and immediately he's got an answer for that. It's choice A, B, or C. I got it worked out. What you just said, it's choice A.
Yeah.
And I turned away from him and didn't speak to him ever again. Because what he demonstrated to me is he didn't have the ability to show that he listened and analyzed what I
Right.
said. And
Right.
at some point in time, I'm going to need you to actually think about what I said, instead of
Right.
you coming at me with a
Yeah.
prepackaged answer. No matter, and again, it didn't matter that your answers were accurate. Eventually, they're going to be off track, and that's why people need to know that you mirror. If he'd have mirrored my answers,
Yeah.
Like, how stupidly simple would that be?
Yeah.
But it would have made me feel hurt.
So, and here again, back to the empathy, back to the mirroring, back to the desire to understand, and within every obstacle is the seed of how to potentially overcome that obstacle. I think
It's
it's
within there, and it's
yeah,
probably something that you overlooked.
yeah, yeah. Chris, I know we've got a time, and there are a couple more questions I want to ask. And here again, I just am so thankful that you're taking the time.
And
But
let's make sure that people know where they could go if they want more.
yeah,
I mean,
and
really the best place, blackswanltd.com is the website. BLACKSWANLTD.com.
And Chris, what I'm going to do is put the link to your website on our show notes so they can go to
Wonderful.
that along with your book. And then you had mentioned a couple other books by the author of the Black Swan that I'll put on the show notes
Cool.
too. But I'll make sure everybody that is interested in learning more, whether it be for you individually, for your organization, for your sales team, for your land acquisition team, if you feel that this is a valuable experience. And I've got another question for you so we can try to quantify how valuable negotiations are. Go to the show notes and you can access Chris's information.
Excellent. Thank you.
So, Chris, to that end, the folks that we deal with, California to the Carolinas and everywhere in between, hundreds of millions of dollars are being invested in land, infrastructure, um, construction of master plan communities. And if you were to try to quantify uh, the amount of money that developers, and let's just keep it at money. I know there's other things that can be gained in negotiations, but let's just quantify it in terms of dollars or a percentage. How much money do you think developers, sellers, contractors, anybody within the industry may be leaving on the table as a result of them not having the experience, the emotional intelligence, the empathy, the knowledge of some of these techniques? Are they leaving on the table?
At least 50%. And I know that sounds
Really?
insane.
Wow.
I know
Yeah.
that sounds insane. But here's why. Not over a 20-year lifespan, but a 3 to 5 year lifespan, there's more deals that the person you're dealing with could bring you if they felt like it.
Yeah.
We had a student that we were coaching when I was when I was teaching at Georgetown, commercial real estate transaction, and they used the skills to find out that the seller of this highly desirable building was underwater.
Hmm.
And the building was a cash cow in a historic district, near 100% occupancy in a growing economy. And the student used a label and says, it sounds like the seller just doesn't believe in the future market fundamentals, and that's why he's selling. And the instant came back, which was a correction. People love to correct you.
Yeah.
Like, correcting is a drug, and
Uh-huh.
it's an irresistible drug, and you say things you shouldn't say. And the agent said, well, he's underwater on a couple of other buildings. So they go in for the kill on the first building. And then afterwards they realize, if we'd have been more gentle, how much did we leave on the table?
Yeah.
It sounds like there are multiple other buildings in play here, but because we were so quick to jump on this opportunity and quick to get max it out,
Yeah.
that we left 3 other buildings on the table.
Yeah.
So quantifying what you lost by moving in too quickly is very difficult. Quantifying the value of the deals that you should have made, but you didn't because you assessed it improperly up front without finding a black swan.
Yeah.
I don't,
Yeah.
I don't, I don't try to make every deal. I want to make every deal I should.
Yeah.
And I want to make it in a way, even if I don't make a deal with you, that you're happy to deal with me in the future. Because the planet Earth is, everybody says our community is a small town. My profession is a small town. I get friends that say LA is really a small town. Everybody knows everybody. New York City is really a small town. Everybody knows everybody. What does that mean? You're going to pay for the good or the bad in the deal that you just made long term because your reputation is going to precede you, or they're going to recommend you, or they're going to badmouth you.
Yep.
You start thinking in those terms, and if you're not doing it in an emotionally intelligent way, you're probably leaving 50% of the value on the table every time.
And what an awesome point to end on, Chris, and for our audience, just to let that sink in a little bit, because I think what you said is huge. I mean, reputation at the end of the day is everything. And part of that is how you negotiate, how you treat people, how you listen to people, and how you react to that.
And do they want to deal with you again? Amen.
Yep, and absolutely. So for our audience, if you're interested in learning more on how you can improve your skills, please see the show notes. Chris had also mentioned during the discussion on how you can access his company directly. And Chris, I just want to say thank you for taking the time today to share a little bit, get a little tip of the iceberg of what others can learn to help in their negotiations and in their professional career. So thank you, Chris.
Carter, absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to be on.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Follow us wherever you find your podcast to never miss a new episode.